Good morning. I'm Caroline Davey, and I'm Professor of Design, Innovation and Society. I'm here this morning with my colleague Andrew Wootton, and we'll be talking about our EU-funded Cutting Crime Impact project, which adopted a human-centred approach to the design of practical tools for law enforcement. Andrew and I run the Design Against Crime Solutions Centre, which we established in 2005. This is a strategic partnership with Greater Manchester Police and the Landeskriminalamt in the federal state of Lower Saxony in Germany, as well as with DSP Group, a research and urban planning consultancy in the Netherlands. Through such projects, we gain insight into the real-world issues facing practitioners and can work with them in a collaborative research project. Our research has evolved over 20 years' experience, leading national and international research projects in which we use design research to understand and innovate around complex issues such as those listed here. So designing out criminal opportunity, urban crime, community policing, and also engagement of civil society. Over this time, we've delivered a significant number of projects, and we would like to talk with you today about one of these, CCI. Cutting Crime Impact, or CCI for short, is about practice-based innovation in preventing, investigating, and mitigating petty, high-impact crimes. You might be wondering what petty crime is. It's a term that is used by the EU Commission to differentiate everyday crimes such as burglary, robbery, assault, vandalism, etc., from organised crime and serious crimes such as terrorism. While we use the term because it's part of our EU project, it's not normally used in a UK context. One of the reasons for that is because the term petty in English means small or insignificant. And these everyday crimes are certainly not that. They are crimes that impact on people's quality of life and can be a major part of their experience of a city. This presentation is divided into 3 sections. Part 1, we're going to introduce to you the cast of CCI. So CCI was a consortium of 12 partners. At its heart were 6 law enforcement agencies, or what we call LEAs, and they were from across Europe. We had our strategic partners, so Greater Manchester Police and the Landeskriminalamt in Lower Saxony, also the Dutch National Police, Estonia Police and Border Guard, as well as the police forces in Lisbon and Catalonia. The consortium was led by us at the University of Salford, and we had partners organisations focusing on research, networking and communication design. So we were supported by our other non-LEA partners. So we had the DSP Group from the Netherlands. We had the University of Groningen that specialised in ethical, legal and social issues. We had the Deutsche Präventionstag, who supported us very much in networking and gaining contact with practitioners. And we had the European Forum for Urban Security, who are a network of local authorities all across Europe. In terms of design of communication, then we had LOBA. We also benefited from the expertise of our advisory board members. So CCI had 4 focus areas which were selected by our law enforcement agencies. We had predictive policing, community policing, crime prevention through urban design and planning, or CPUDP, measuring and mitigating citizens' feelings of insecurity. CCI had two main objectives: to enable law enforcement agencies and security policymakers to adopt a preventative, evidence-based and sustainable approach to tackling high-impact crime. Also to support our 6 law enforcement agencies, our LEAs, in researching and innovating practical, evidence-based tools that meet end-user needs and suit their operational context. To achieve these two objectives, CCI adopted a human-centered design approach. And part 2 will explain a little more about how CCI undertook this work. Over to you, Andrew.
Thanks. So the project adopted this design approach. And when we talk about design in the context of CCI, we have a very broad definition of design. We found over the years that often design is confused with just the way something looks or the way that how something feels. So it has quite a sort of shallow definition of the word. And obviously we use that in everyday speech when we talk about designer furniture or designer clothing. But in the context of this project, when we talk about design, we're talking about it from a more, if you like, enterprise or industrial context. So we're talking about design, not just in how something looks, but as Steve Jobs says, design is about how it actually works. So it's about the way it is used by users and the way it functions. And as it takes this broader approach, we're looking at things like design in terms of products of design, service design, design of environments, communications and systems. And we adopt approaches and theories that come from areas such as systems design or user-centered design. But most importantly for us, it's human-centered design. So CCI was very much focused on innovation, as in creating novel and new approaches to dealing with some of the problems our LEAs had, but also this concept of end user centeredness. So really looking at what the end user on the ground was doing and what they needed and designing something that would suit them. And this required us to gain deep understanding about this end user context and also allowed us to potentially reframe some of the problems that were brought initially to the table by our law enforcement agency partners. And it also, this design approach enabled a solution implementation to be thought of at the very front end of the process of developing these tools. So we were always looking at optimizing the uptake of the outputs of the project. And so to enable all of this, we very much drew on this human-centered design theory and practice. So human-centered design is something that was originally evolved in the systems design field in response to problems being caused by designs that were overly focused on technology. So it is very much linked to areas such as psychology and understanding how the human user potentially interfaces with complex systems and enabling them to be designed in a way that best suit the user. So it places the human being very much at the center of the design process and focuses on the human participants within any design system. And this approach very much contrasts with the more technology-centered design approach, which can have a number of drawbacks. So one of the outputs from very technology focus is something that's been identified as the technology spiral. And this normally happens where there's some technological opportunity that comes along alongside performance or productivity requirements. And these are brought together, and designers will infuse technology to try and address the problem, with technology often being seen as some sort of panacea. But the problem is, what tends to happen is then the results are that users are overwhelmed by complexity, managers are overwhelmed by complexity, by the data, and maintainers, people who have to look after these systems, are overwhelmed by the complexity of problems that may emerge. But then what normally happens is this is fixed by the designers producing these technology fixes, effectively infusing more technology into the system, which then results in increased complexity in use, maintenance complexity, and management complexity. And so in the end, you end up with this performance shortfall relative to the early inflated expectations. But by this stage, time has moved on, and there's a new technology come along, and so then generally there's that spiral starts again. So this was identified a long time ago, in the mid-80s, as a problem with this overly focus on technology. And for us, as we've seen technology increase with the use of high tech, as it were, and internet and all sorts of things, there is this tendency to overly focus on technology within a problem, and this idea of technology solutions. So human-centered design attempts to avoid this spiral by focusing on the people within the system, and in the design process, trying to understand the nature of those people's roles and needs, how those roles can be supported, and how those needs can be met. And so human-centered objectives, rather than technology, drive the design process. And these objectives are to enhance human abilities. So basically to understand, to identify and understand the human abilities that are valuable within the system, and to cultivate those, but then also to understand the limitations of the humans within the system, things that they're not good at, and then try and identify compensatory mechanisms or processes that help this. A classic compensatory mechanism for humans in computers has been the undo command, because humans make mistakes very commonly. And so having an undo command, which I think was first introduced in the mid-70s, and must be one of the most used commands in all of computing. But that's a classic idea of overcoming a limitation. And the third thing is to foster human acceptance. So to understand and address the preferences, concerns, and values of the humans within the system. But this does require that designers gain insight into end user needs, requirements, and contexts. And so because of this, human-centered is very much bottom up than top down. You need to talk to the people who are actually going to be using your design solution. But it also then supports problem definition and reframing. A famous quote by Russell Lincoln Ackoff is that we fail more often because we solve the wrong problem than because we get the wrong solution to the right problem. So problem identification is really key at the front end. So human-centered design, by focusing in this way, offers an alternative perspective on problems. So if we take the example of an aircraft, from a technology-centered perspective, the purpose of the designed aeroplane is to fly the passengers from point A to point B. But from a human-centered perspective, the purpose of a designed aeroplane is to support the pilot and the crew that are responsible for flying the passengers from point A to B. So the focus is very much about agency and responsibility in that context. So human-centered design looks to get deeper understanding of end users, stakeholders, and the context they operate in. And for that reason, it's more of a mindset that needs to be adopted. Curious, empathetic, imaginative, collaborative, in that it involves working together in a meaningful way. Iterative, in that it often involves testing and repeating things, but humble, in that you don't go in there expecting you know everything about the problem domain that you're studying. So in terms of CCI, the way we implemented this was to actually put the design process onto the program of delivering the project. So The design process will start with a problem or an opportunity, and then it goes through a number of phases of alternately divergent and convergent thinking as you develop first the design brief and then the designed outcome. And these phases are discover, define, develop, deliver, deploy, and digest. And so effectively, you go through the project, you first of all discover more about the problem, then you define yourself a brief, then you develop a design solution, then you deliver that design solution. So you produce it or you manufacture it. That lends itself to then the designed outcome, which then has to be deployed or implemented in some way. And finally, over time, that is used and digested. And what tends to happen is then new needs or opportunities emerge, and the cycle then can begin again. So in terms of CCI, the project was divided into what we call work packages. And so research to understand the end user requirements and the problem context of the law enforcement agency partners was undertaken in work package 2 and work package 3. So that was in the sort of discover phase of the project. We then, in the define phase, we analyzed the findings, generated insight, and defined solutions and directions that we might go in through design labs, which were collaborative meetings with the partners where we actually looked at things. We'll talk about that in a bit. That then led to the brief, and then we went into the develop phase where we had 4 work packages looking at the 4 different areas of CCI, designing, prototyping, and developing the specifications for the tools. We then produced and demonstrated the tools in work package 8, and then the designed outcome from the CCI project was effectively our 8 tools, along with some other models and policy recommendations. And then we're now in the deployment and implementation stage, and we'll get some feedback on that from Roberta in the next presentation, where she'll talk about a particular tool that was developed.
Thank you, Andrew. So we would like now to move to highlight 6 practical learning points, 6 lessons, if you like, from the front line of design that we've collected, not just from CCI, but also from our work over the last 20 years. The first lesson relates to the whole of the process. And what we'd like to suggest is that innovation does not equal technology. It can take various forms. There's actually a lot of hype surrounding technologies, and too often innovation is simplistically equated with technology. There is actually something called the hype cycle, produced by the consultancy firm Gardner. This tracks the expectations of a technology over time. As you can see, technologies climb to the peak of inflated expectations before passing into the trough of disillusionment, and then slowly rising to a plateau. However, innovation can take many forms: a new or improved product, service, process, or communication design, all of which may or may not involve technology. Research and innovation projects should support the development of innovations that are feasible and address a well-understood problem in a practical way. Technology may be part of the solution, but in our experience, it is rarely the complete solution.
Okay, so the second lesson is to avoid jumping to the solution based on your initial assumptions. So to always test your assumptions. And this draws on this human problem of basically bias, but also this concept of first instances. And that's where, when we think about a subject, we often have stored in our brains sort of archetypes that we draw on for these things. So if I was to ask you to name 3 birds, for example, the chances are you would name things that have the qualities of a bird. So they live in a nest, they lay eggs, but more complex birds like penguins, for example, would not be in the top 3 because they aren't the first thing you think about. So often when we're talking about a problem area, people will have assumptions that they bring, and often these may not be questioned. So first thing to do is to test your assumptions. This may be seen as being about speed or efficiency, and that it's often seen as we need to get moving on the project and just start developing a tool. We don't want to waste time looking at, we understand what community policing is. We don't need to look at it in this particular context. But we'd suggest that's where opportunities for innovation are missed, because there's often lots of interesting things happening at the coal face, if you like, of any activity that can reveal opportunities for innovation. So the important part of the design process is this very front end, the requirements capture phase, in the discover part. And in our model that we use, the discover part is the largest part of the diagram because it's the thing that sets the whole project direction. And so if you actually discover later on in the process that you've set off in the wrong direction because you've not understood the problem, that can be very costly. So in the front of CCI, we did a lot of research at the front end in order to actually look at some of these assumptions and challenge them. So the research at this front end shouldn't be used to just post-rationalize what you already think is the answer, or to sort of rationalize a cool idea that you hold at the outset, because it's a waste of time and opportunity. And so the early requirements capture research enables you to frame the project and its direction, identifying perspectives, issues, and attitudes that may reflect or impact on the tool, but also future implementation, identify users and stakeholders, and generate insight for new ideas. So what we always say to partners is you need to, in effect, let go of the edge of the pool, leave your assumptions behind, and deep dive into the subject, because there's often interesting things that you can find there that may inform your work. And in the CCI project, we did a lot of generation of insight in the discover phase, and these then fed into this process of analysis and synthesis in the define phase, where we used these design labs, which were workshops that actually brought people together to discuss these things. And this leads us on to the third lesson, which Caroline will talk about.
So collaborative workshops are useful, but they must be well considered. There seems to be a belief that consultation will result in acceptance of solutions or technologies developed by security research and innovation. This is not automatic. Indeed, consultation needs to be carefully thought through and managed. Other people have a lot to teach you, even when, or perhaps especially when, they disagree with you. We've noticed a rise in the purported use of design thinking in security projects. Often this seems to be merely a code for casual dress and post-it notes. There has been significant backlash from the design profession regarding the perhaps overuse of the term design thinking. This video you can find on YouTube by Natasha Jen, who is a partner at the renowned design consultancy Pentagram. Indeed, design thinking seems to be almost sprinkled into projects like it's magic. Unfortunately, design thinking isn't magic. Collaborative analysis and design synthesis activities really must be carefully structured to be effective. A random group of people aimlessly chatting will not be very useful, no matter how much coffee you give them or how many post-it notes they use. The CCI project spent considerable time designing the design labs in which our partners collaborated in design synthesis activities. Well-designed and developed bespoke frameworks which were printed A0 size. These were used to organise requirements capture findings and map stakeholders. A programme of carefully defined activities were designed for partners to undertake in teams to create ideas and pitch solutions concepts to the wider workshop group. This moves us to lesson number 4.
Yes, so number 4 is to focus on developing solutions to your own problems first, ones that suit your context. You can fix the world later. So LEAs and cities should focus on developing solutions that are actually suited to their own unique concept, and should worry less about the application in other contexts, because research and innovation done to develop and implement feasible solutions that work for you, undoubtedly, if it does work for you, others will be interested in the approach you take and will take their own learning from it. But silver bullets are really not necessary.
And this moves us to lesson number 5. Understanding what works is a beginning, not the end. This is about what we call the search for silver bullets, or the one-size-fits-all fallacy. There is no one solution that can or should be applied everywhere. Nevertheless, it is useful to understand what works and why, because you can steal it. As Oscar Wilde is said to have said, talent borrows, genius steals. Literature on what works can help to identify well-resolved solutions, general principles and relevant theories, and clever strategies for addressing the causes underpinning problems. Such material can provide insight into previously unconsidered mechanisms and be a useful springboard from which to build solutions tailored to your specific context and requirements. But be creative. For example, what works in public health might inform security solutions. In seeking to understand some of the issues around the prevention of radicalisation, I recently reviewed research into the public health campaigns to tackle AIDS. I was interested in the targeting of such campaigns. While some campaigns were aimed at the adult population, others were targeted at specific groups. Information about what works may also be used as provocation to develop one's thinking and/or to support development of practical solutions. This takes us to lesson number 6.
So the final lesson is about research is research, but innovation, development and implementation is actually a design activity. So researching crime and security issues is obviously the domain of criminology and security research, but creating and implementing solutions or interventions based on this research to be used in the real world is a design activity. And there's a great deal of knowledge and good practice developed since the 60s regarding the best way that this is done. Interventions can fail, not because the principles on which they're based are flawed, but because the process of their development and implementation is poor. So the difference for CCI was, by taking a human-centered design approach, we were able to consider some of these issues early on, and actually consider the humans within the system who at the end of the day are responsible for delivering the service, whether it's flying a plane, educating children, policing, or making a sandwich. So really understanding the needs and requirements of the humans in the system and making this effort can reveal valuable insights so that the humans in the systems are supported and problems and opportunities are better defined. And for this reason, we took a great deal of effort to get this front-end research right to understand needs and contexts.
So in terms of CCI then, the final results of the CCI project, partner LEAs research designed and produced 8 tools, 2 in each of the CCI focus areas. Each tool has its own branding that was designed to help communication of the tool within the LEA and support implementation. Tools have been demonstrated in their real-world context and implementation is ongoing. All CCI tools are available to view online and download from here. Thank you so much, and do feel free to get in touch if you'd like any more details about CCI or about the tools. We look forward to listening to our colleague from Greater Manchester Police talking about the Community Connect tool. Thank you very much.